Today I'll be talking about bonding with your tarot decks, ways to bond with your tarot decks, or specifically 5 ways to bond with your tarot decks. In this video, I want to tell you how you can bond with your tarot decks and how you can bond with a new deck. So I'm sure most of us will have new decks coming in like pretty regularly, and how do you sort of sort through all of those decks? How do you bond with your tarot deck? How do you kind of create a kinship or connection with the images on the cards? And how do you feel like, how do you establish that sense of familiarity? How do you break the ice? That's what I want to talk about. So I think to start with, I feel like in order to establish like a familiar sense of familiarity or connection with the deck, I think a premise for that is that you need to be able to connect with the artwork. You know, I feel like the art has to be something that appeals to you, something that you're drawn to, something that you like, because if you purchase a deck with art that you're not really into, maybe just because it's popular or because maybe someone gifted it to you and they don't really know your taste, I think it's really hard to actually have a relationship with it, just because it doesn't really speak your language. You know, if it's like, you know, like the art style or the images on there are just completely not your cup of tea, then I don't, it's really hard to you know, to start on the right foot, I guess. It's kind of like, you know, when you're meeting a new person, there's different types of people in the world. They're just types of people in the world that you just won't vibe with, right? And it's not because you dislike them, or it's just because they just, you know, they're just not your cup of tea. So I feel like decks are the same way. Like, I feel like to start with, the images on there, the art has to appeal to you at least to some level. Like, you have to feel drawn to it. Okay, so let me just start by saying that I know you might hate me for this, but I actually don't really like doing deck interviews. I know a lot of people do deck interviews, and there's a lot of deck interview spreads out there, and they're all good, and I've tried doing some of that, and it was fun, but it's not something I prefer, because to me, it kind of feels like to do an interview just right when you open the deck, or just like that's the first thing you ever do with your deck. That's kind of like meeting someone. It's like before you even shake your hand and introduce yourselves and just tell each other your name, you're just like, sit down, I have a couple questions to ask you. So I don't know, it feels like, for me at least, it feels too soon to just jump into a reading, because interview or not, it's a tarot reading you're doing, and I just feel like there's like a couple things you could do to kind of smooth into that. But I suppose if you just, you know, if you're just into the idea of just doing a reading, just start practicing with images, by all means go ahead, because it's not something I prefer, but I have done that a couple times, like in the past, and then I discovered that it's not something I prefer. But if you prefer just going at it and then just doing a reading right off the bat, then go for it. But I'm just saying, like, it's not my cup of tea. I don't like just starting with an interview spread, or like an interview, deck interview. But yeah, anyway, here are some of the ways that you can bond with your tarot deck. I think I said 5, but I really meant 4, because my first point was don't do deck interviews. No, actually my first point was you need to like the art, so I guess the math is still correct. Sometimes I messed up how many points I'm trying to make. Okay, so the first point was, I forgot to mention, the first point was, the premise was that you kind of have to be drawn to the artwork, and the artwork has to appeal to you. So the second way to bond with your deck is to look through each card individually and look through them one by one. So I'm sure this won't surprise you, because it's a common thing to do, you know. I'm just going to use the Steampunk Tarot, Wisdom from the Gods of the Machine, as an example, because this is the deck I'm working with this month. So basically just look through the individual images and don't go too fast. I think just give yourself some time to look at the details, to wander around, to look at each corner, to scan the images, and then just, you don't have to do anything in particular. You can just kind of take the images in. You can notice if there's anything that captures your interest. You can be like, oh, this is an interesting depiction of a bird, or this is an interesting use of symbols, or something like, oh, I've never seen like a 4 of Cups done like this. You know, just slowly, and then just give yourself like a couple seconds, maybe 10 seconds on each card. Just go through them slowly and just look through them. I feel like you don't have to force yourself to like zoom in and just notice every single detail. I think those things, you know, you can save that kind of exploration for later, but I think do give yourself like a decent amount of time to just kind of take everything in, absorb, notice things, that kind of stuff. So you can do this and then go through all 78 cards, or if you have a anomaly card, then go through all 79 cards. And then I think the next thing you can do is like take out all the major arcana, take all the major arcana cards, and then just look at the majors, and then just kind of spend time with that group of cards, and you know, just in particular. And then when you're done, you can spend time with all the suit of wands, you know, take out all the fire cards or the wand cards, and then spend time with suit of swords and that kind of thing. And then you can just, you know, like pick out cards from different groups, right? For example, you can take all the masculine archetypes on a major arcana. You can take out the Emperor, the Hermit, the Hierophant, spend time with them, see what you notice. You can take all the feminine archetypes, such as the Empress, the High Priestess, etc. You can take out all the celestial cards, like the Star, the Moon, you know, etc. Like, just kind of create groups in your head, like, kind of just spend time with groups of cards, and then just notice, like, and just see what you notice, and see if you can make any connections between the images, if you notice anything. And yeah, you know, like, for core cards as well, you can just spend time with the core cards from the Suit of Wands, and you can take all the pages and just compare the pages and just see what you notice. So I think doing this will allow you to kind of just look at the images, know what the images are depicting, and you can start sort of downloading what the language is for this deck, right? Because the language or the world of a particular tarot deck is conveyed to you through mostly images, and sometimes they would reinterpret or rename the suits, or they would have creative names for courts or whatnot. So that's another clue, but for the most part, I feel that the images really speak to you a great deal. That really defines the language or the landscape of the tarot deck. So I think you should definitely try to start to notice if there's any patterns. Okay, so speaking of patterns, then my next thing, which is the third thing you can do to bond with your deck, is to look for recurring motifs, images, and symbols. So this is where you get more specific and you try to understand how the language of this deck is constructed. You're looking for common vocabulary, or you're looking for vocabulary that's commonly used, or commonly used terms in the form of images and motifs. So, you know, you can I'm just going to use the Steampunk Tarot as an example again. So when I was working with this deck, you can just kind of start looking through the decks again, you know, it never hurts to look through it over and over. It just kind of adds to an impression that you already have. You know, you might notice that there's a lot of machines, obviously because it's a steampunk deck. You know, there's a lot of machines that are going on, and then there's lots of depictions of machines, and then there's lots of depictions of explorations, there's lots of depictions of little gadgets, and then characters sort of looking at a blueprint, or characters being in a room and then they're trying to invent something, they're trying to plan their expedition or something. And there's also lots of depictions of vehicles, and the minor arcana of the suit is actually named after 4 different types of vehicles. You know, cups are being submersibles, pentacles being leviathans, and then the air or the suit of swords being airships. So they're actually just named after machines and vehicles. And this deck is called Wisdom from the Gods of the Machine. So it's very machine heavy, like lots of machinery, lots of clockwork being depicted in this deck. So when you look at all these images, when you look at all these motifs, right, you can get a sense of who your deck is, or what the kind of like the temperament or personality, or like what the worldview is like for your deck. So if you put all those images together, if you think about machines, that could speak to productivity, right? Because if you think machines, you think of factories, and you think of things being made, or energies being generated, or work being done, right? Machines are made to do, they're made to sort of make our lives more efficient. So it makes me think of productivity. So this is a good deck to go to if I want to plan, if I want to examine my habits, if I want to, you know, ask questions about productivity and stuff, or about work. And then if you look at all the vehicles speak to movement. And if you combine that with the theme of exploration that you notice, right, you see a lot of characters just going off into like adventures and stuff. So you will know that this deck probably has a great spirit of adventure. You know, it's about exploring the world, it's about expanding your map, it's about going to places that you've never been. There's this really, like, it's really energizing. So this is one of the reasons why I like to use Steampunk Tarot, or just any decks that are sort of created in the genre of steampunk, to do career readings, because it has such a great sense of movement and momentum, and it's really motivational for me personally. And plus, I just love the genre of steampunk. So when it's something like I like, you know, when it's something you like, it just gives you the extra sort of extra push, or the extra spice, you know. So yeah, that's another thing you can do. You could sort of look at the common images, look at the common symbols, and then just try to understand what those symbols are talking about. And what are some of the common vocabulary terms, what are some of the commonly used terms in this deck, and then you understand your deck so much better. Okay, so the fourth thing, I actually meant for this to be the third point, but I kind of skipped over it by accident. So the fourth thing is try to immerse yourself in the world of your deck. So what this means is after you look through your deck, and maybe even after you look through the common images of your deck, you can just try to you know, because when you're learning something, when you're learning about something, you want your brain to soak up everything about that thing. And it's kind of like when you're trying to learn a language, right? When you're trying to learn a new language, for example, if you're trying to learn French or Japanese. If you're trying to learn French, obviously a good way to do it is to be in a French-speaking community or hang out with people who speak French, who are willing to practice French with you, or even go to France or go to Montreal or a country or city that speaks French, because you will be immersed in the environment of that culture, of the culture that speaks that language, with people that speak that language. Because more often than not, it's not just the languages, it's not just the mechanics that you're learning, you're also learning and internalizing the culture and the attitudes that are behind the words, certain words that you use, right? So it's kind of like you could sort of really add that nuance by immersing yourself in the world of your deck. So how to do this? For example, Steampunk Tarot. Just going to use this to illustrate what I mean. For example, if you know that your deck has this particular genre, for example, this one is clearly steampunk, and if you can have other decks that are in the genre of fantasy, in the genre of science fiction, or classical art, or Celtic mythology, and that kind of thing. So a good thing you can do is, number one, you can start reading genres. You can start reading books in the genre of steampunk. You know, read books, watch movies, listen to music that are sort of related to your deck, that are related to the genre of your deck. And you can look up images, you know, do a Pinterest board, you know, like, or just like do like a, it's not really like a vision board, just like a collage or something, you know, just like any images that are related to your deck. You should just kind of just get your hands on them. You know, it doesn't have to be super hardcore. It could just be like, you know, really casual, right? It's like if you're doing a steampunk tarot deck, you can just listen to steampunk music, just load it on your phone, or just like look up a YouTube video or a soundtrack that has to do with your deck. If you're doing like Wildwood Tarot, if you're learning about Wildwood Tarot, trying to connect with Wildwood Tarot, I think it's a good idea to look into Celtic mythology, because I think a lot of symbolisms, it will probably help you with a lot of symbolisms that you would encounter in Wildwood Tarot, because it's based on, you know, Celtic mythology and stuff. So I think studying into the genre, like reading up on the mythology, folklore, you know, just check out the Wikipedia page and that kind of thing. That definitely helps, because it's helping you make connections in your brain. Like, it's giving you a firmer foundation of future readings that you may do, where you have to analyze the symbols, where you have to engage with your intuition and kind of just, you know, create words based on what you see and just kind of interpret the cards in front of you and that kind of thing. Okay, and the last way to connect and bond with your deck, well, I wouldn't say it's the last way, but just the last one in this video, the fifth way to connect with your deck, is to do daily draws. Haha, surprise, surprise. So daily draws are great, and especially when you do daily draws only using that deck for a long period of time. So for example, I'm working with Steampunk Tarot right now in February, and I've been doing daily draws every single day, actually daily spreads, every single day using the Steampunk Tarot. So just kind of like, I'm with you for this month. Like, I'm just gonna spend quality time with you. So one way to kind of just bond with your deck is just to use it whenever you can, you know, just don't use any other decks. I mean, it's not like a rule or whatever, but it's a good way to just like spend time with the deck. Just you know, just do it, like say just use that deck for a week and do readings with it for like a week, and then just as you kind of repeatedly try to interpret the symbols as you engage with it, you know, you just get a better sense of how it works, how it talks, what kind of language it uses, what are the common motifs and images. You know, you can study further into this deck. Alright, so actually I do have like a little extra. I think this isn't really for everybody, so I think I'll just add it at the end. Another way to bond with your deck, this has really worked for me, but like I said, it's not for everyone, is to trim your deck. So I know this may seem horrifying for some of you, and maybe for a lot of you don't want to trim it immediately right after you purchase it, because it seems like, you're cutting into a brand new deck, you know? But a benefit that I found when it comes to trimming your deck, like for example, like the Steampunk Tarot, it originally actually had white borders, but the moment I purchased it and after I checked that everything was fine, I didn't have to return it, I freaking trimmed it because I knew that I hated the white borders and it needed to be trimmed. And I think just physically altering your deck, just physically trimming it really gives you a sense of, it really helps you bond because it just feel like this is kind of part of your creation. Like you didn't create the images or the deck itself per se, but you kind of let your footprint, or you kind of just affected, you kind of reshaped this physical product, and it kind of becomes an extension of you because you worked on it, because you kind of changed it in some way, you kind of made it to be your own, you kind of customized and personalized it. So trimming really gives you that sense of bond and sense of familiarity. At least for me, because I know like after I trimmed the Wildwood Tarot, it just spoke to me so much more, because in the beginning I was just like, it just felt really distant and it wasn't something I was into. But recently I decided to revisit it and I trimmed it because the white borders were terrible, and then after I trimmed it, the images and the pictures were just so much more alive, and I could just feel myself, oh, I can really understand that. I'm beginning to understand this deck, and it's starting to speak to me, and it's because I kind of, you know, it's kind of like doing like a couples yoga class together or something. It's like you really establish that intimacy after working with it so closely. I did the same thing with in the Child Tarot, and I did this with some of my Oracle decks from Coley Bear and Reed, and they're all great. Like they're just like, it's just a great way to kind of get close with your deck if you're into trimming. But yeah. Anywho, let me know what you think. How do you personally bond with your tarot deck? How do you connect with your deck? Is there anything I missed, or is there anything I'm wondering about? I'm always open to feedback, and hopefully this video has helped you have a better relationship with your deck. And yeah, I guess that's it. So until next time, I'll level up life with tarot. Keep calm and tarot on.